Venus and star blessings, everybody. Hope you're all doing well. I'm still feeling quite unwell, not myself yet. So bear with me while I just share bits and pieces as I can. Today, I want to talk about Venus and Venus's invisibility period and some things to consider from ancient Babylonian teachings, which I give credit to Rumen Kolev for imparting this wisdom. We sat together about 8 months ago and did a video for about 3.5 hours. I encourage you to watch that. It's pure gold, pure wisdom. It's what I've learned. I've been studying Venus very intensely for the last 5 years. And what I keep realizing is that the deeper I go, the more there is to discover. She is really the most fascinating, mystical, complex goddess there is, without a doubt. Let me just show you. Where are you, chart? No. There we go. Okay. This is Rumen's program. There is Venus right there. Just grab an annotate friend. Okay, there's Venus there. Right next to her is Jupiter. This is the fixed Babylonian zodiac that we are looking at, but we can very easily switch to the equinox. Okay, you saw things just move slightly. In any case, Venus is invisible. That's the point. She is basically behind the sun, preparing to catch up to the sun and form a conjunction, which will happen in Gemini in June, which will be the Gemini-Venus star point. I'm going to come back and talk about the Gemini-Venus star point as a separate video with separate themes and separate considerations that are outside the scope of what I'm talking about today. The most important thing at the moment is for us to understand what's actually happening with Venus and why is this important and how can we work with it. So this graph is Rumen's graph, which he has created, and he's the only one that's created this. And we must give our credit and respect to him for this. This whole picture you see here has infinite stories to tell. And obviously, that's not what we're going to do today because that would take a very long time. But all I really want to focus on is where we are with Venus at the moment. First of all, just understand this graph here is showing us literally the movement of Venus. So there is the Earth, which is where we are. There's the sun, and this circle around the sun is Venus's pathway. And as she's traveling around this circle, she is encountering all these different divinities. So over here we see a retrograde cycle. Over here is another retrograde cycle. There is a direct period. There's another direct period. There's different divinities associated to her as a morning star, which is on the right-hand side, evening stars on the left-hand side. Very simply put, morning star is goddess Athena. Evening star is Aphrodite. At the moment, we are in here in this longer period of invisibility. The shorter period is down here. So I won't bother talking about that because it will just take more time. So I want to focus on where we are right now. Morning last is basically referring to the last time we saw Venus as a morning star, which is different based on one's latitude. But essentially speaking, she became invisible a few weeks ago in the Northern Hemisphere and fairly recent here in the Southern Hemisphere in Melbourne, let's say. So this invisibility period, which is the longer period, goes for approximately 3 months. And this is Venus descending into the underworld. And this is where she meets these different divinities, the Gorgon Medusa, Ereshkigal, the goddess Ishara, which is a divinity corresponding to ancient Babylonian, Mesopotamian times. And then up here, he also has Persephone. Now, I don't know how familiar you guys are with these divinities, but I can tell you that all these divinities correspond to the underworld. If you are to study the myths and stories of each of these divinities, you will find that the common denominator between all of them is that they are divinities of the underworld. And the Gorgon and Ishara both have snakes associated with them as well. Ereshkigal is the queen of the underworld. She's the one that actually kills Venus in the story of Inanna descending into the underworld. Persephone or Persephone is the Roman name, Persephone is the Greek name. Same divinity, same goddess. You may find variations in their stories, but essentially it's the same divinity. She too is a goddess of the underworld. She was the one that was abducted by Pluto, taken into the underworld against her will initially. However, her journey in the underworld transitioned from a young, innocent, virgin maiden goddess, the daughter of Ceres, into she too became a queen of the underworld as well. So these are all really powerful divinities that confront us with our own darker feminine side, if you like. And also, what Rumen actually says is that in this invisibility period, this is Venus transitioning from the spiritual world into the material world, which is a very difficult transition. Just think about those words, transitioning from spirit into the material. It's a very difficult passage. Essentially, we do that when we are born, right? When we leave the spiritual dimension, as it were, and we are born into the material world, taking on this body and so forth. That's what that is as well. That's a passage of a transition, right, from one world to the next. And I guess that's why babies, when they are born, they come out screaming and crying for the most part, don't they? You never see them dancing and laughing and having a party. Anyway, at the moment, this particular period of invisibility is psychologically, psychically, spiritually, emotionally, is all of us going through some version, some encounter with our own inner world. And in this process, there's a lot of death going on, loss, death, rebirth, transformations, seeing things that we don't normally see. And Rumen actually says that it's a period where we are greatly tested. And how are we tested? We are tested in this way, according to what Rumen says. Basically, Venus morning star, which is Pallas Athena, she's attained tremendous wisdom through all her experiences as the morning star. She takes all these experiences and wisdom into this journey here, and she is tested in her strength and learning, and just everything that she has learned. She now is put to a test. And the way this translates in a basic mundane manner is that our all things pertaining to Venus, all Venusian things during this invisibility period are going through a tremendous test in our own life. So love, relationships, friendships, all Venusian things, we are being tested in a spiritual way. We are being tested in the material world with our spiritual learning and growing, our spiritual armor, our spiritual understanding. What have we attained and understood? And it gets tested in the material plane, in this period here. That's what's happening. So it can be a very dark time, actually. Look at the divinities associated with this period. They're all goddesses of the underworld. They're very magical in and unto themselves and very powerful, but they do point to a very dark period of where we must go through certain trials and tribulations and tests in the authenticity and validity and honesty of our Venusian world, in our friendships and love. The strength of the relationships that we are in or have developed go through a really intense period, basically. And if we're not in a personal sexual relationship, then there are other aspects within ourself that we will be going through some type of process with. And I'm one of those people. Like, I'm not in a personal, intimate sexual relationship. So I'm going through this process within myself, as many of you will be as well. So the other thing that Rumen says with this as well is that this is not the greatest time, um, to start new love affairs or new relationships. A lot of people will, and whether or not that works out depends on, and I suppose, a number of different things, particularly the soul. But as a general rule, it is said that when Venus is in this particular period here, she is going through a death process. If you think about the death process relative to Inanna descending into the underworld, which is her descending through, is it seven spheres, I think it is. And each sphere she goes through, she must relinquish something of herself, and it is translated as her relinquishing the garments of what she's wearing, clothing, jewelry, etc. That's a metaphor for her spiritually relinquishing attachments to the material world, because when she gets to the bottom, she's completely naked. There she is, there, completely naked. And Ereshkigal is the one who hangs her on a hook and kills her. And that story unto itself is very complex and has a lot of layers, but ultimately she does get help, and she is reborn. So every time Venus comes to this particular invisible phase, this is the process that we go through. And I think the more understanding we have of this, the more awareness we have, the more attention the more we pay attention to our Venusian life at this time. And I suppose work respectfully with this underworld, if you like, journey and passage, the more we can grow from it, the more we can relinquish the attachments that no longer serve us, observe the spiritual lessons as they come, as they appear. And because in this phase here, we are being tested in the material world. How much have we learned from that spiritual perspective? So it's a bit of a, it's kind of like the dragons slaying the ego, if you like, because the ego is the one, it's a necessary function, of course, but it is the one that has all the personal attachments in the material plane. And when I say personal attachments, it's not only about physical and material things, it's also about ego identity attachments. to superiority complexes and things of that nature. In evolutionary astrology, Jeffrey Wolf Green would say that the soul chooses to incarnate, takes on the form of the body, ego, personality, has numerous desires to experience things in the world, and the ultimate purpose and aim is for the soul to eliminate those desires. It's a very similar principle as this, because when we are in this zone, we are recognizing our spiritual infinite self, if you like, and our spiritual learning and growth and lessons, and we are relinquishing and releasing attachments so that we can become more purified. In fact, Ruman says that, let me just find that quote. He says, the morning star transitioning into the evening star is the spirit from the sublime. The spiritual field goes into the material world. That's one thing he says. So this point here is it's a sublime spiritual entrance, if you like, from the spiritual into the material. And he uses the word sublime very purposely, because the spiritual world is sublime and the material world only reflects aspects of that spiritual world in small little speckles. So the other thing he says is that when we are in this phase here, we are going through a spiritual purification. It's just simply a period of purification, which can lead to an elevation of our spiritual self, our spiritual insights, our spiritual understanding. But what does purification mean? It means, I suppose, depends on which lens you are looking through, but very simply put, purification is something that would correspond to eliminating impurities. So whether that's eliminating impurities in our body in a physical way through diet, or through exercise, or through prayer, chanting, any of those sorts of processes, which are very, very powerful, apparently, during this time, to go through those sorts of practices, to devote and dedicate a conscious path into that, can be very, very rewarding. Those are some of the things that we can think about while we are in this phase. He says, Athena to Aphrodite, which is this phase we're in here, Athena to Aphrodite, right? Athena's on the right-hand side here. We've just come out of that. We're in the underworld, purifying ourselves and getting ready to be reborn as Aphrodite. He says that Athena to Aphrodite, and I love this, is love to the eternal world in the created world. So Athena to Aphrodite, Athena is love to the eternal world, the uncreated world. Let's just think about that. Love, Athena to Aphrodite, is love to the eternal world in the uncreated world. So this zone here is the transition of Athena from how can I put it? Sometimes translating this can be a little bit challenging. And my brain's not 100%. So let me just think about this, because I want you guys to understand what this means. Up to the eternal world, uncreated world. Right. So in this phase here, when Venus is invisible and dying, going into the underworld, she is not only going through the metamorphosis and the relinquishing of attachments and so on and so forth. She's going through a very specific purification of the understanding or the remembrance, if you like, of the material to the spiritual. The love, as he puts it, to the eternal world. The eternal world, this is what he's saying, the eternal world, which is the spiritual dimension, is the uncreated world, because the created world is in the material, in this physical dimension. So Venus in this zone here is Athena dying, becoming Aphrodite. And in that death process, he says she is dying into the eternal world, which is the uncreated world. It's very powerful if you understand this, and if you, I suppose, utilize it in your life at the moment, from the point of view of this deeply reflective process of Venus in this underworld journey. It's like, as I was saying earlier, it's that process of, transitioning from spirit world into material world. And the difference between, the spirit world and the physical world is, one's on one end and the other one is on the totally opposite end. They're two extremes. So this, I guess the reason why this could be difficult, this passage as well, is because we are, in order to get closer to that spirit world, if you like, which is the highest level of this Venus divinity, she must undergo these deaths. That's why Inanna goes through those 7 gates, those death passages in her descent into the underworld. And it's the, let me put it in plain English, it's the releasing of attachments so that we can spiritually purify and be reborn. And think about it, we go through this a lot, right? Because this passage up here happens every time Venus is transitioning out of a morning star into an evening star. And perhaps at different times in our life, this might be more pronounced. It would depend on other things that are going on in your chart as well. This is one very significant phenomena and transition of the actual planet Venus in the sky, and the archetypal, mythological, symbolic journey of Venus disappearing in the sky and then reappearing. On one end, she appears as a morning star, hangs around for 8-9 months, and then she goes back into the underworld. She goes through a death passage again, and she's reborn into an evening star. This happens all the time. So I guess for those that are fans of the gorgeous, divine Venus, I think it's important to learn about these divinities and her period as a morning star and her period as an evening star, and the fact that they are totally different goddesses. It's the same goddess, but they correspond to different divinities. Over here on the right, the last 8 months, we've had Venus as a morning star. Venus morning star is the goddess of war. It's very, very complex. But really, for today, all I wanted to do was just bring to your attention that we are currently in an invisible phase of Venus. We are in her longer invisibility period, which lasts for about 3 months from the beginning to the end. As we speak right now, Venus is invisible. This chart is for Melbourne, Australia. So her visibility and invisibility dates are different here than what they are in the northern hemisphere. But basically, if you're around close enough to New York, she appears in late July in the northern hemisphere, and it's early July here in Melbourne in the southern hemisphere. So it varies based on latitude. And Ruman's program is the only one that actually gets it 100% accurate relative to her appearance and disappearance, because Ruman is actually, first and foremost, he's an astronomer. That's what perhaps maybe many people don't even realize. He is actually a Babylonian priest from the Babylonian times. So he's an astronomer, first and foremost. He speaks a very different language. Anyway, his program reflects basically his knowledge, which is, just out of the scope of most people's understanding. Let me just see what else I've got here. He says about Ishara, actually, which is, one of the divinities associated in this longer invisible passage, although he also associates Ishara to the shorter invisibility period. So Ishara connects to both invisibility periods. And he said that Ishara is connected or associated with spiritual purification. He said that she's a very complex divinity, very complex goddess, associated with spiritual purification. And he also said associated with atonement of sins. Now, some people might not like that word because it does trigger indoctrinated religious cults, if you like. So take that as you will, but it doesn't have to be a negative thing. Atonement doesn't have to be a negative thing. I guess atonement is, well, I see it more as a spiritual purification, actually, just becoming more conscious, Let's see what else we've got here, if there was anything more about these divinities. Yeah, so he draws a distinction with the comment that I made before about this is in this period here, where she's invisible right now, the longer period. It's Athena. It's the exact phrase I used. Athena to Aphrodite is love to the eternal world, the uncreated world, and Aphrodite, which is the evening star, is love towards the created world. He uses the word love because love is the word that is mostly associated to the goddess Venus. So whether she's a morning star or an evening star, she's a goddess of love. That's the first thing. Then he uses the words created world and uncreated world because he's drawing a distinction. He's basically saying that the created world is the material world, and Aphrodite in her evening star phase, she's transitioning, and she's gaining experience and experiencing love as a love goddess into the material world, the created world. That's why he says Aphrodite is love towards the created world, meaning that the evening star is having an experience with the created world. And Athena is having an experience, especially up there in that invisible phase we've just been talking about the last half an hour or whatever it's been. She's experiencing the uncreated world. They're two very, distinct phases, basically, again. Okay, so I think I'll wrap it up. It's very, very complex, as you can probably see just from what the few things I've pointed to, the few principles I've pointed to. And the main thing that I really wanted to share today is Venus is invisible. She will be invisible for 3 months, her whole duration from start to finish at this longer period of invisibility. It is a time of spiritual purification, basically, simply put. And what we get out of this journey is up to us. And I guess if it means that in this period it is not a good time for Venusian things to flourish according to ancient teachings, it's not, then we must perhaps give some thought to that. And I guess the way to test it is to observe your own life with all Venusian things at the moment. And, have you undergone some type of purification? Are you undergoing some type of purification? Are you paying attention to this? And if friendships and relationships, there's problems occurring, conflicts, or things falling apart or not working out, then pay attention. This could be the reason why. It just could be. So again, what we get out of this is entirely up to us, it's just about our own consciousness, observation, and understanding in very much the same way that the earth undergoes this process of death and rebirth herself through the seasons, for instance, summer, winter, spring, autumn. So for you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, there's a rebirth with spring. That's going to take place. And then, we are going through autumn here. Soon we're going to go through winter, which is a really a darker period, a death period. It's a time to go within. So these processes of death and rebirth are in everything, in the sky and on the earth. And when we are looking at the map of the sky, which is this chart here, this is a 3-dimensional chart reflecting actually the sky in its truest representation. Whereas this chart here, solar fire, this is 1-dimensional. Okay, this is just the order of the planets as they are traveling. And the sun's pathway, which is the ecliptic, which is this outer circle out here. The sun's just traveling through the ecliptic, tropical zodiac, planets are following in that order. That's all you're seeing here, although this within itself has numerous layers as well. That's another story though. But in terms of the true representation of the sky, this is it here. See all these little speckles even outside of the chart, all these little dots. There's these are all stars, all of them. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and uh, thousands. Constellations are in the background. The yellow circle is the ecliptic, sun's pathway. This is another great circle here, which is the ascendant, descendant. Meridian, I see. Great. These are called the great circles, basically. But anyway, that's going into a different tangent. So let me know what you think. Are you going through this Venus underworld journey consciously? Have you noticed that it's been a bit of a darker period? There's been a few more challenges with Venusian things. Have you had to let go of some attachments? Have you had some issues in friendship circles or friendships, or what stands out for you? What has come to light for you? And don't forget, we are well and truly still in her invisibility phase, although because we are, oh, well, we are about, let me see, yeah, we're 2 weeks away from the Sun Venus conjunction. But when the Sun and Venus form their conjunction in Gemini, just go back to perhaps this chart. It's just a bit easier visually. Where are we? It's here, isn't it? So there it is there. It needs to be adjusted slightly because they both need to be on the same degree, but basically it'll be 14 degrees, right? This conjunction here is called a cazimi conjunction, which the sun has with other planets as well. There was a Sun-Jupiter cazimi just a few days ago. This is the Sun-Venus cazimi. And Venus is in the heart of the sun. That's what cazimi means. It's an Arabic word. But in terms of when she will be visible, it's not going to be for about a month in the Southern Hemisphere, Melbourne. So it'll be early July for us in Melbourne when we will see her in the night sky as an evening star. And for those of you in the Northern Hemisphere, close to the latitude of New York at least, it's going to be later in July when you'll see her as an evening star. So even though she forms her conjunction to the sun and has this rebirth and has this love affair with the sun, kisses the sun, you know, has transitioned, left her morning star phase behind, rebirthed herself into an evening star. And it's Gemini, and I'll come back and talk about that specifically. Just remember, she's still going to be invisible, even though she forms her conjunction to the sun. So even though this is an important passage in a new part of the cycle as per the 5 Venus star points and the 5 Venus star points on the wheel, the pentagram, which again, I'll come back and speak to separately, we must understand that she's still invisible, till early July in some cases, later July in others. So when she's invisible, we're still we're not in this zone necessarily because, well, we are, because when you look at what he's written here, he says evening first, EF. And what he's saying to us there is this part of the cycle in this part of the circle at this point right here. Just grab an arrow. Right here. This is telling us this is when Venus will first appear in the evening sky after she forms her conjunction to the sun, June 4th. So that's telling us that until she becomes visible, we are still dealing with these goddesses. We are still dealing with the underworld energies. We are still going through some type of purification, and there are still tests and tribulations occurring. So you can't force your way into this zone here until she becomes visible. That it will naturally happen when she becomes visible in the sky. We don't decide that. She decides that. So you might want to say, well, I don't want to be in this period anymore. Well, too bad. This is where we are. And this is where we are until she becomes visible as the first evening star. Her first date of visibility in the evening sky. So I think that's really worth considering and reflecting on when you think about all Venusian things. If a lot of what I said today went over your head, don't worry about it. Just focus on, what does Venus mean? What does she represent in your life? Well, all those things that you understand about Venus are impacted at her time of invisibility. It's not a flourishing time. It's a time to go within and purify. Hopefully all that makes sense to some extent. I'll see you guys soon. Hopefully see you soon. I'm still unwell. Don't feel like being in front of a camera, hence my audio presentations. And I've gone way over the limit of what I wanted to, which is very typical of me. Much love and Venus. Underworld purification journey, may it be blessed for you. May you bring light in that underworld journey and allow the process to happen organically and not resist it. One thing I've learned through life is that when we follow the script of our chart, which is the soul's desires, and we don't resist that, doesn't mean we eliminate all obstacles and all challenges. Of course not. But it does make it a lot easier when we don't resist what the soul is intending. See you soon.